But we are going to be talking about agentic AI, and we're going to be talking about it again in a really intentional way when we're thinking about applying AI to solve actual problems and to improve experiences, as opposed to, hey, there's this new shiny thing I'd like to try. I'm just going to put it on top of an old process that I've got and hope that it works. And so that's really the premise of today, and I think that's really the focus of the last few and the next few episodes. The power of people building is people actually doing things with
Mhm.
genuine and meaningful business impact. We're going to do around the room intros, and I think how this episode came about is, Becky, I saw a wonderful post from yourself about what you were doing and what you were building, and we are a customer of ElevenLabs, and I know what's possible.
Mm.
So I thought, what a wonderful way to join the dots. But yeah, let's get a round of introductions. Becky, I'd love to come to you first.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you both today and the wider LinkedIn audience to share a little bit about what we're working on. So, I'm Becky. I work in our talent team at ElevenLabs. I have been here for about 8 months now. It's been a wild journey. We have grown 50% quarter over quarter since I joined, which is sort of most intense growth that I have ever had in my career. But I think still our headcount is very thoughtful and deliberate, which we can talk a little bit more about. I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland, and yeah, I've spent the last sort of 12, 13 years in recruiting, began an agency, very quickly realized I was a terrible business developer. And so moved in-house, spent a couple of years at Facebook, and then really over the last kind of 6 to 8 years have been focused on building teams for mostly US headquartered startups, building out their sort of international presence. But here at ElevenLabs, yeah, doing a little bit of everything. And yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, magic. And Vic, you've obviously been on the show a few times before. But yeah, for those that you don't know who you are, I'd love to get an intro.
Yeah, so I'm Vic. I'm head of product here at hackajob, and I really jumped at the chance to join Becky and Sam on the podcast today because we've been launching and designing our AI agents over the last 6 to 12 months, and as a product person, I think it's really exciting. All we're talking about is AI, and I think it's really exciting to have a chance to share some of the ways that we're choosing to use that technology, but in a way that really adds real value for people, but also in seeing how other companies like ElevenLabs are applying that in the recruitment context. And we're also a customer. So, like Sam said, so it's really nice to kind of share some of why we're a customer as well, and why that also helps add into really great experiences for our customers.
Yeah, awesome. And I think, like, to frame this discussion, somebody put this so well to me. Bill Bourland described it almost perfectly, the recruitment process, into two core tenets that will remain unchanged. And you can go back decades and decades. You can go from, adverts in a window to adverts in a paper to duration-based ads online to programmatic to sourcing. You can put in screening tools, you can put in assessments, you can put in everything in between the two parts of the process, but two parts remain the same. And if you get those two parts right, the rest of it falls into place far easier. The first part being having a really good understanding from the hiring manager of exactly what they are looking for to stop feedback loops
Mhm.
expanding and to not impact candidates' experience as they go through the process of not being the right fit. And actually, you could have uncovered that more cleanly. And then the business impact of actually selling to the candidates an accurate reflection of the role itself, and getting them to either opt in or opt out of joining your organization. Can you clearly articulate the role to both sides is really the premise. And if you don't get that right, well, then you end up with a lot of stuff that sometimes you need to over process in between
Mhm.
in order to maintain that efficiency. And so we're going to neatly have this episode kind of chopped in half, but we're definitely going to jump about between us because we've all got tons of experience across this. But we're going to start at the start of the process, and how we're using voice agents, how we're using agents in general to think about that first part of the process, that initial calibration. And Vic, why don't you, kick us off there, start us off that journey?
Yeah, sure. So we, this like same as Sam was saying there, we were kind of really trying to understand when you are an AI platform, how do you get the best data in to mean that that feeds all of your matching and all of the opportunities that are then presented to candidates in the most relevant and accurate way. And when we were talking to clients around their hiring processes in general and how that works, the briefing call and that first conversation with the hiring manager just kept coming up time and time again around this is something that every recruiter and hiring manager should be having where possible. And how do that's the place where the most accurate information comes up. But what we also were hearing was it can sometimes be hard to get time with hiring managers, but also what that then often means is like weeks between the initial briefing call and then the candidates being then sourced and fed back to the hiring manager for feedback. So although that conversation would often have a hugely rich amount of information and context and really experienced people on both sides feeding into that, there was this like large kind of time sink between that first conversation, seeing candidates, and then actually often finding like a bit of a mismatch. So when we started looking at voice agents and kind of agentic systems, we thought, well, what do we already have as hackajob, which solves some of those like key challenges? And so one key part of that was, well, could we have a voice agent working directly with the recruiter and the hiring manager to help guide that conversation? And then could we show candidates during the call so that after seeing one or two profiles, actually that sparks extra thoughts on both sides or extra signals on both sides about what would really define that ideal candidate. And so Chase, when he's working with recruiters, initially we designed him to kind of drive the conversation and then show candidates in the call, and that really gets that alignment point. But that was one of our like key learnings from conversational AI was actually that experience technically was actually really hard. And what we found was Chase would interrupt quite a lot of people. And actually we had two really amazing experts in the room who could manage that conversation themselves. So we actually took a step back from conversational AI when Chase is with the recruiter and the hiring manager. And he instead really focuses on listening, understanding the requirements, and then making sure the right candidates are shown, or the candidates that from what he's understood are shown to the recruiter and the hiring manager to kind of really calibrate that role in the meeting. So effectively going from, a 3-week lead time from briefing call to seeing candidates to, 10 minutes within a briefing call and getting that output then and there, which is really exciting. And then we also were like, well, what happens with teams who don't have recruiters? And so that's where we've really started to design Chase to kind of have the ability to work with both personas. And Chase will actually also run a briefing call with a hiring manager directly. In that case where, you've got a small one-man band teams, or even recruiters who maybe just don't have the bandwidth if they're the only recruiter in the organization. And their Chase will kind of help drive the conversation. And that's where, again, that experience is really, really interesting, watching how people early user testers like testing the system, like kind of going, oh, does he know this? Does he know that? Can he answer that question? And kind of designing that whole conversation in a way that gets all the right information we need to really find the ideal candidate, but then, is fast enough and specific enough and flows really well without, feeling like it's a waste of time for the person doing it. And we've done a lot of that through really thinking about the experience as a whole, which some of that was choosing ElevenLabs as the voice and having that really natural conversation and it feeling like fresh and different to maybe some of the more robotic voices that are available, which has been really good. And then also we are still iterating on our prompting and how that conversation flow works to really cover all the scenarios, which I'm sure, Becky, you've kind of experienced as you've been designing and iterating on your AI agents.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting the way you describe it, Vic, because this is sort of how we were hoping that our agents would feel, is that they're it's not a replacement, but it's an assistant sort of. It's a talent assistant. It's an add-on, and I think it sounds like you're making great progress towards that goal. And yeah, I mean, with AI Becky and AI Oscar, which is very weird to talk about myself in the third person, and candidates and I have great fun saying like, am I now talking to AI Becky? Is this the real Becky? Which is why I usually keep the camera on. But maybe we'll take a step back and talk about sort of the challenge to begin with. So we are very, very lucky at ElevenLabs to have a high volume of inbound interest, and also like a very high volume of high quality inbound interest, because being a remote first company, I think sometimes there are challenges when it comes to posting a role, because people are obviously super excited to see a remote first role, and they maybe sometimes then aren't paying as much attention to those requirements. So we were finding that the numbers were sort of unmanageable. 1 quarter alone having about 31,000 inbound applications across both tech and non-tech hiring for a very lean but efficient talent team of 3 at the time. So we were really conscious of the fact that people were putting out applications and then not hearing back. Like they were going into the ether, which is, sort of the consistent themes that you hear from candidates when they're not having a good experience. So this was something that we really wanted to solve. And we had many discussions about how we could do that. We looked at a couple of different options on tooling around, sort of stack ranking applications, like not making decisions, but stack ranking, who's meeting certain criterias. I think a lot of those tools are still in sort of beta mode. They're still buggy and they're still being tested. And so we really wanted to also show off our own technology, which we're super proud of. We did we sort of changed the description of I think people will say dog fooding, right? You're like eating your own, to drinking our own champagne sounds a little bit nicer than eating our own dog food. So wanted to drink our own champagne. And we are very, very fortunate on our team to have a wonderful conversational AI engineer who is embedded on talent. Shout out Tudor if you happen to be watching. And Tudor is an expert in all things conversational AI. So we sort of brought the problem to him, which was when we have this huge volume of inbound applications. And one of the main challenges is that when we're speaking to candidates, we're actually not getting the right signal on our first screening calls. Sometimes the candidate has never heard of ElevenLabs. They might have, now they'll have done some research, but they'll also have a lot of questions. A lot of these questions might be logistics, benefits, things that really can be probably prepared ahead of time. So we had 2 goals. The first one was, how can we make sure with this high volume of applicants that whoever we're speaking with, it's a better quality conversation from the outset? And also, how can we make the candidates feel a little bit more connected to the process before they speak to the real Becky or Oscar? And so this is where our agents were born. So we used our own technology to clone our voices. I think they're actually pretty spot on, but we only did sort of the 30-minute version. You can go much longer where you provide 90 minutes of reading newspapers. We didn't have that time. So we got as close as we could. We also worked with our wonderful talent intern, Sana, who helped us basically build the knowledge base on the back end. And there was a lot of iterations, testings, trying to sort of break the models with some wildcard questions, like you mentioned earlier. But overall, we decided that we would ship them and launch them publicly, with the idea being that whoever is confirmed for a first stage interview with myself or Oscar will receive a link to the agent. And I think it opened up a huge more amount of kind of data points than we initially thought. So it was also, if someone hadn't played with the agent, talked to the agent, it's a little bit of a signal on lack of motivation or lack of interest. But also, candidates were telling us straight out of the gate that they felt more empowered. They felt as if they'd already had a conversation with us, and they felt more confident coming into that call. So yeah, it's been a huge success. We've actually had a number of customers reach out to say can I hear more about the recruiter agent? Because maybe they have, like you mentioned earlier, Vic, they don't have a talent team, or they have a very lean talent team. And so yeah, we're hoping, I can really tell my parents that I've made it now, that I'm voicing an actual product.
Yeah. And I think, again, let's circle back, right? 31,000 applications across 3 people in a quarter is just not feasible with all of the working hours in order to provide those candidates an experience. And it does have a lovely double play in that it's part of your brand, it's part of what
Yeah.
you do, it's part of your organization, and like naturally candidates are going to have a higher inclination to want to engage with it. But I think that knock-on impact, you were talking about people feeling more prepared.
Yeah.
Love to know, like, when people are arriving at interview, is that a tangible difference? Is that something that you're measuring? So like, it's great to get it from that candidate lens of them feeling that they feel more engaged, but like as a recruiting team, are you seeing that?
For sure. And this is something that we wanted to try and get some more tangible results in terms of like, has this experiment fundamentally affected sort of our time, but also the candidate's experience? And so we were looking at 2 data points for that. The first one was on our ability to actually reduce our first round screening calls to 20 minutes, because previously every single one of them was 30 minutes. And when you're doing 10 of those a day, it's draining, right? It's exhausting. So for the recruiter, and you want to also give the best version of you to the candidate. So by call 10, you don't want to be quite flat. So we first of all wanted to reduce that time. And I think we were able to do that effectively by saving probably about one hour to 90 minutes a day for both myself and Oscar. Which obviously is coming into between kind of like 5 to 8 hours per week, which is a huge time saving. But in addition to that, also when a candidate has spoken to one of us, whether they progress or not, they do receive a candidate experience survey, and in that they are asked, like, did you talk to our agent? What was your impression? And it's been overwhelmingly positive so far. I think what people have called out is this word connection keeps coming up, like, which actually is kind of interesting, because I think there's this fear with AI that it's more of a disconnect, but actually people have talked about feeling more connected with ElevenLabs, feeling more, they got to practice as well. So they got to kind of practice their interviewing, so
Nice.
almost acting as a bit of an interview coach, and trying to refine. You can hear people on the back end refining their questions based on the information that they're getting. So what I've seen is a real difference in how candidates show up at interview. They do seem to come in more confident, and I might mention something and they'll say, oh yeah, like, AI Becky talked about that. So that's been a huge win for us.
Mm-hmm. And like, we talk about connection, we talk about experience. Like, one of the most frustrating things from a candidate perspective, and we see a lot of, is either ghosting, where they hear nothing back at all, and or that email that says, hey, this role is no longer open, you weren't a fit, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Blah, blah. Like, automatically generated content that comes out.
Yes.
And actually you're able to do that in a far richer way, and people are able to maybe deselect themselves from the process without having to both parties spend time, and get a bit of a first-hand experience. And so I think it's about, again, like that problem statement, that setting of the
Yes.
challenge. And when we think about that kind of time saved, maybe go back to that initial piece of like the actual briefing setup.
Yes.
Becky, from your side, what does that experience look like? Do you think your job descriptions tell the story at the moment of what's really needed in a role? Like, over your
Yeah.
years in recruitment, like, have you spent time going backwards and forwards with a hiring manager on like building a shortlist and then having to add
For sure.
an extra bell or whistle?
Absolutely. And it actually, I think, I think there's a couple of companies, and, I'll shout out Ashby being one of them, which is the ATS, who do a really great job on job specs. There's a couple like Post Hog. There's a few others that I really admire in terms of just radical transparency. I think our job specs are a pretty good signal of where we're at today. I always think that job specs can be improved. And actually exactly what you've said there, Sam, for people to deselect themselves from the process. So, I'm a fan of like, this job will be a great match if, but also this job will not be a great match if, because I feel as if it brings it to life a bit more. Like, a static job description is very different from having a conversation with somebody. And so usually when we kick off a new role here, I will say, thanks for the job spec. Like, we have the sort of checklist there, but like day to day, like, what is this person going to be doing? Like, what are some of the skills, both hard and soft, that we really need to lean into? And I think there's also the untold story there of like me having the understanding of what an existing team looks like, and maybe some of the strengths and gaps on that team that I will lean into when I'm doing sort of my screening process. So I think with job specs, they're somewhat limited from that perspective, which is why, the idea of Chase working away in the background and sort of gathering some more of that, like some more of that live context is really valuable, because this is certainly something that I think most recruiters will battle with. It's not having enough time with the hiring manager, or potentially priorities shifting, which happens a lot in most companies, but in a company like ElevenLabs, we're in hyper growth, so that's also something that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
Go, Vic.
sorry, I was just going to jump in there because I think there's like two bits that you mentioned there, Becky, that kind of shape, why we built Chase where he is at the moment. And obviously we're just at the start, but I think one part of that is like all of that extra context that you bring as a recruiter in terms of like understanding the team, knowing, extra bits to really shape like, okay, right, what is our sourcing strategy from that point?
Mhm.
That's stuff that I think loads of recruiters, that's their expertise that they bring to that, partnership when you're trying to bring in really great people to the business. And I think where one part of, as we were kind of thinking about what does the future of hackajob look like when it comes to AI, is like actually we still think hiring is an extremely human process, but how can we
Absolutely.
identify the parts of the process where for humans it's not actually, you don't need like the AI will do a great job of this,
Yeah.
and we don't need humans in the loop for these parts. But actually these areas like making sure you've got these two experts talking about how to bring a really great person into the team, and then like recruiters guiding candidates through the process once they're in. I think that's like a really amazing way to keep all of that system working really well. And I really like that's how you approached it with like AI Becky and AI Oscar, where you're like, okay, actually, here's all this information that actually, it's all kind of available. We probably say the same thing to everyone
Yeah.
when they come in. And actually, what I really want to do when I first talk to somebody is understand, like, as quickly as possible, do we feel that they're a good fit for the role, and like coach them through that process. But then if you're kind of spending time answering questions that maybe they, now they're finding out beforehand from
Yes.
the AI Becky and AI Oscar, then like I think that's a really cool way to approach it. And you can kind of see why it would give candidates lots of confidence, and then make their experience with you on that first call much nicer as well.
And a lot of this stuff goes down to like the candidate experience, the recruiter experience, the hiring manager experience. We did have this kind of quote come up from the audience. It's certainly from a candidate's perspective. Everything we talked about has been around being really intentional about either capturing the challenge at the beginning or capturing the job opportunity really accurately at the beginning, calibrating correctly and ensuring recruiter, hiring manager and candidate experience is maintained. We spoke a lot about that kind of recruiter and candidate experience from AI Becky, AI Oscar, which is like, how can we make sure that 31,000 people have a good experience rather than many of them just being missed because there's simply not bandwidth. And I think they're like great additions. Obviously, the ability to create agents, whilst not straightforward, is slightly democratized, and it's going to become increasingly democratized to the point that there's feasibly you could set up an AI Becky type agent for each recruiter and create like not just a value proposition for a part of an organization, but a value proposition for how to be hired and be successful in the job hunt in particular roles. You could go down to that finesse. And I want to just to like take a step back a minute here, because what's really empowering about this conversation is you both have created things which solve a problem. How can other people, if they're thinking about something which they've got, maybe it's the same challenges as we've talked about here, are not getting the right brief, or I'm seeing too many applicants and I want to create a better experience? What are some of the things which you think about with voice first and some of those considerations? And then maybe second, like what are some of just the broader considerations when you're thinking about that experience for the end user, when you're thinking about something which could feel robotic, could feel inhuman, could feel that you've lost connection? That, I think in these instances it hasn't. I'm open. Who wants to go first? Jump in.
Yeah, I can jump on this one, Vic. Yeah, feel free to add to it. I think I think what's interesting is that, the AI space in general is quite noisy, as we all know. Like there's a lot of different tools, there's a lot of different options, and outside of then just the traditional, generative AI companies, there's lots of different add-ons. So I think it can be quite overwhelming for most folks that I speak to in people and talent to try and think like, okay, we're trying to solve a problem and we keep hearing that we can use AI to do that. So how can we do that? And one of the things that is always coming up at ElevenLabs, and shameless plug here for ElevenLabs. One thing that keeps coming up is that like voice is sort of innately human, right? So like this is the great connector across, across continents, across experiences is voice. So when we think about recruiting and talent in general and it being sort of an innately human, function. And I'm a big believer in recruiting being an art. Like I very much do think it needs that human judgment and that human touch to be successful. I think voice is the obvious sort of focus area in recruiting for how we can reach more people, how we can connect with more people, and how we can improve that candidate experience. Like this is probably the biggest challenge that recruiters and companies face in general is people saying that they've had a poor candidate experience. And especially in the last couple of years, as the job market has been quite rocky, that's only increased. So I feel as if like I would encourage people to be a bit curious about voice and how they can lean into that in different areas of their process as well. Like we have explored we're nothing formal yet, but like, cloning some hiring managers' voices and trying to like include that in our outreach for passive candidates. We haven't got our CEO on board just yet to clone his voice for that use, but we'll hopefully get there. But I think, the voice seems to me like the kind of natural human element where people can leverage AI, especially in talent.
And that's
Yeah.
hyper personalization at scale, just quickly on that point. So a while back, we were talking like in the industry more generally about custom landing pages for particular jobs that spoke about the individual value proposition for that role. What a richer experience that is for a candidate at the end, and an easier way to consume it. It's easier to listen and watch than it is to read. Sometimes we will spend a lot of time on the screen. I love that as another thing. And it's all about being intentional and taking decisions. And sorry, Vic, I want to flip to you as well about like when from a pure product perspective, when we're thinking about like people's experience, like what are some of the factors people should think about if they're wanting to experiment or think about them?
Yeah, I think I think my biggest takeaway over the last like 6 to 12 months has been kind of just give it a go. Like, don't be afraid of giving it a go, and just understanding, it might not be for everybody. And I think we're in that shift of like technology adoption where actually, you've got your early adopters who, are speaking to ChatGPT every day and using these models every day and feel like it's more their friend rather than a piece of technology. And then you've got some people who are, much more, it's going to take them a lot more time to get on board, which is it's natural for any kind of technology adoption. But so my answer always in these shows are, give it a go. Don't be afraid to give it a go and see what happens. But we, from a product perspective, a hackajob across the huge range of people that work in recruitment. It's a very varied industry, and a very people industry. Our approach has been to give people options. So even with Chase, you actually don't need to speak to Chase. He will speak to you, but actually you can read it and type it at the same time, depending on what you're comfortable with and where, it might be where you are in the office, all that sort of stuff. And kind of giving people the opportunity to try things at their own pace, I think. So, even in our platform, you can speak your requirements into the platform, and we've done that because we know it's much richer information, but we know some people maybe aren't quite ready for that yet. So we've kind of gone for more of a let's show everyone what's possible, but let's try and give people the option. And I think that is slightly different when you think about the kind of candidate experience side of things, but also, especially when you're working with kind of young people, and actually there could be a whole huge range of different opportunities there, which is maybe a little bit different from what we have. But yeah, my main thing is give it a go. Don't be afraid that it might, whatever the first version of what you try might not be, the thing that people are like, this is the best thing ever. But if you really kind of like listen to what people are saying and make sure it solves a real problem, then that's kind of normally you figure out the right direction to go in.
And like what I love most about this period right now is the democratization of access to technology has meant that recruitment for the first time is often first for innovation, but certainly not last, right? And in many of the areas that we've seen innovation in recruitment before, let's take cost per application, right? That is marketing. The retargeting is marketing. Consumer marketing was doing this for a long time before recruitment was doing it. And all the pitfalls, all the challenges, all the mistakes, all of the things which maybe people were hesitant about, that was well trodden. And it was just a difference between buying a pair of shoes and finding a job. Now, obviously, they're two very distinctly different things. But the technology behind it, all of those things, we just follow the pattern. We're typically following sales and marketing in recruitment. Typically. And it's the same as the ATS. It's the same as all of the systems of record which we use. They were all following previous systems of records in parts of the business that had bigger budgets, that were solving a bigger business problem or seemingly a bigger business problem. I'm a firm believer that people power businesses, and it should be your first point on the agenda. And we should continue to drive that story. But we're at a point right now where we've got two instances here where you're interacting with people at scale with your brand voice as a recruitment team, and where we're interacting with the business, leveraging modern technology in a way that typically recruitment would have followed, and we're often leading now, which I think is really heartening to see.
Really exciting.
Yeah, it's magic. And we're like near to the end of the show. I've got loads of statements from people on LinkedIn about what they think, which are great. And thank you for your comments, folks. But no like specific questions. If somebody's got a specific question, got maybe 30, 40 seconds before we call time. But I want to say a massive thank you to Becky and to Vic for joining. What is amazing is you can go and have a conversation right now with AI Becky or AI Oscar at ElevenLabs, and you can go and see it for yourselves. If you are having troubles connecting the dots between what your job description says and what's actually required for the role, or you're finding yourself in a scenario where you build a shortlist and then they ask, hey, can they stand on one leg, and seeing Old Lang Syne as well, then, let's capture those requirements earlier on. You can get Chase joining your briefing calls. And this is, the power of technology. Anybody can turn these things on now. But please do it intentionally where there's a problem, as these two great examples today. Thank you for joining.